So what does it mean to have a balanced diet? Well, it means you have to have enough fuel, right, substrates for ATP production, things like glucose. You have to eat enough of the essential amino acids and essential fatty acids that we can't produce ourselves. And you have to get those vitamins and minerals like electrolytes and sufficient water, all in about the right amounts. And your body helps you with that a little bit, right? Because we can filter out excess electrolytes, things like that. And if you don't get enough calories, we call that undernutrition, and that's obviously bad. But you can get enough calories and still be in a state of malnutrition. Malnutrition means, yes, I might be getting enough calories from my 2 liters of Mountain Dew, but I may not be getting all the essential amino acids and fatty acids and vitamins and minerals and things that I need. It also means that you are getting a relatively balanced amount of those macronutrients. And so the choosemyplate.gov, well, let me zip this down here so you can see a little bit of dairy there, right? This is about what your plate should look like, right? A lot of fruits and vegetables, some grains and proteins, relatively small amount of dairy if that's something you enjoy, and that should be sufficient. When I was a kid, we used to have a food pyramid, and on the bottom was bread, and now we know that that was kind of dumb, but essentially eat as many fruits and vegetables as you can. Make sure you get enough protein. We measure the energy content of food in calories, and a calorie is just the energy that is required to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. But when we look at the back of our Snickers bar and we see calories, what we're really seeing is calorie with a big C. And calorie with a big C is really kilocalorie, or 1,000 calories. So when we talk about a 2,000 calorie diet, that's a 2,000 kilocalorie diet. It's really a 2 million calorie diet, but it doesn't sound as good when you say it that way. Lipids have by far the most energy per unit volume of any of these macronutrients. Proteins and carbohydrates are essentially the same. Then why do we use carbohydrates primarily for our energy source? Well, the answer is they're much easier than lipids to mobilize quickly for ATP production. But lipids are much better for long-term energy storage. Typically, we need 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day. Your caloric needs depend a lot on you, right? A, your size, B, your sex, C, how active you are, and then everyone's metabolism is just a little bit different. This is just some general ideas about how many calories are in, bread, for instance, and rice and cola. In this case, you're getting a lot of calories, but they're pretty empty because you're not getting many other nutrients, whereas you will get other nutrients with these things. Complete proteins are proteins that have all of the essential amino acids that you need. Incomplete proteins are still full of protein, still full of amino acids, but they don't have every single essential amino acid, right? So you can cobble together incomplete proteins and have a whole meal that is complete. Again, this is why, especially if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, it's important to be a little bit more thoughtful about your plate to make sure that you combine things in a way that makes them complete. And actually, if you look around the world, a lot of cultures, foods that tend to be paired together, squash and beans and corn and things like that, when you put them all together, they tend to form complete proteins. And what can go wrong clinically when we're talking about nutrition? Well, if you are not eating enough, you can be undernourished, undernutrition. And anorexia nervosa is one example of a psychological condition that messes with your self-image. And so when you look in the mirror, you don't see what other people would see when you look in the mirror, and you tend to starve yourself. And that has some obvious health issues. Bulimia is a related disorder where you eat, but then you purge through vomiting or laxatives or whatever, so that your body isn't actually getting those nutrients, and that also leaves you with too few calories and probably too few of your essential nutrients. but it also can cause lots of other problems because vomiting and laxatives in excess can cause problems along your digestive tract. So you can get your sodium potassium levels off, and you can have cardiac arrhythmias. You can mess up your esophagus and your teeth and things like that as well. Obesity is also a health issue that's actually much more common. So obesity is defined as being over 20% over your ideal weight, and that's that's not too difficult to do, right? I'm probably close to that edge just if you look at my BMI, and over a third of U.S. adults, and these are a couple years old, these statistics. It's just caused usually by greater food intake than energy usage. That's really, there are two main kinds. Regulatory obesity is by far the most common. This is the one most people, including myself, have an issue with, right? Failure to regulate food intake. The problem is that we have evolved to crave foods that have high calories, and they're delicious. And so, especially when we are sitting at home, we are all at risk of getting the quarantine 15. That is regulatory obesity. Some people, though, have metabolic obesity, which means that there is some underlying condition that causes your body to metabolize differently. This could be a thyroid issue, right? If you have hypothyroidism, that is metabolic obesity. Your metabolism is too slow for your own health. Or it could be an issue with leptin receptors. Leptin is a hormone that your adipocytes make when they are full, saying, hey, it's cool, you don't have to eat quite as much, we've got plenty of reserves. But there are lots of, this is my dad bod, there are lots of health risks that come along with obesity. Elevated cholesterol levels, especially high LDLs as compared to HDLs, can cause issues, right? You can then have too much cholesterol in your blood, and that can lead to atherosclerosis, this buildup of plaque in your blood vessels. This is especially a big deal if it happens in your coronary arteries or in your brain, as it can lead to a heart attack or a stroke. Everyone has a basal metabolic rate, and this is just the amount of calories that you burn running your body, right? This doesn't mean that you are exercising. This just means that when you are awake and alert, your body is going to burn this much energy just to keep the functions going. And you can measure this. Everybody's BMR is a little bit different. You can measure the amount of oxygen consumed or the amount of CO2 produced, and that can tell you, at least as an estimate, how much ATP you're producing. So the average person has a BMR of about 1,680 calories a day. Again, this means that you are not necessarily exercising, and you have to take in enough food to support those activities. If you're bigger, your BMR is probably going to be higher. If you are a male, you probably have a higher BMR than females. On top of that, this is what different kinds of exercise will do, right? Even just slow walking or speed walking burn a lot more calories than resting. So moving around is really good for you. Climbing stairs, jogging, swimming works everything in your body. It's a very, very good, complete exercise. We also use metabolism to regulate our body's temperature. As we know, when you convert glucose into ATP, the majority of that energy is lost as heat. But lost isn't always the right word. Sometimes we want that heat. And so sometimes if you are cold, your body will crank out thyroid hormone, if you recall from test 1, and thyroid hormone will crank up your metabolism. And as you make more ATP, 60% of that energy is lost as heat, and that will help warm you up. Well, how do we regulate our appetite? Well, that happens in a couple of different centers in our hypothalamus with the help of some places along your digestive tract. And we can regulate it on a short-term level and a long-term level. The short-term level largely has to do with the stretching or non-stretching of your stomach, for instance. So if you drink a bunch of water, or if you chew, and so you have a lot of action going on in your mouth, chew gum or something, that can, in the short term, make you think that you're full. But your blood sugar will remain low, and so long-term regulation still tells your body that you're hungry. Satiety center, meaning like I'm sated, I am full. Elevated blood glucose levels, hormones like CCK that we produce, those are telling us that we have food in our digestive tract. Stretching of the wall of the digestive tract. This is all saying, cool, we have food, we don't need to be hungry anymore. I have a friend from college who used to talk about hard packing, trying to get as much food in before your body realized you were full. Right? Hunger is largely hormonal, right? Neuropeptide Y comes from your hypothalamus when your blood sugar is low and tells you that you are hungry. Ghrelin is secreted by your stomach when it's empty. And I remember that ghrelin is a hunger hormone from your stomach because when your stomach is empty, it's ghrelin. Anyway, leptin is a long-term satiety hormone because it's produced by your adipocytes, and it tells your body, hey, our adipocytes are full. You don't need to keep overeating. If you're not producing a lot of it, you may need to overeat. Clearly, this is an area of intense research interest by the dieting and nutrition industry. Finally, let's talk about heat transfer. So how do we move heat in and out of our body? Well, there are four main ways that heat can be transferred. Radiation is one big one. It just, the sun's heat radiates through space at us, right? So if you want to stay warm, you may lay out in the sun and let the sun heat you up through radiation. We also radiate heat off of ourselves, and that's a big way that we lose heat. We can also lose heat through evaporation. If we, dump water on ourselves or jump in a pool or just sweat, that water, in order to evaporate, requires energy, and it gets that energy from your skin. And so evaporation causes you to lose heat. That's why you do not want to be wet in the winter. Conduction is direct heat movement by touching something, right? So when you touch a hot stove, it feels hot because that heat is directly being conducted into your hand. Or when you touch something that's cold, the heat is being conducted from your hand into that, cold doorknob or whatever. Convection is the movement of air that can cause exchange of heat. And I won't get too into that, but sitting in front of a fan is convection. Convection is also caused as air on the ground heats up and expands, and it's going to rise, and that's going to cause other air to suck down to the bottom that's cooler, and you get sort of a natural movement of heat. Our body also does very specific things to regulate our body temperature, right? We maintain it at a very tight 98.6 degrees, more or less. And if we are hot, we may sweat to cool off. Or we may breathe deeper. Respiratory heat loss. We can lose heat through our mouths, and that's evaporative too. Think about a dog panting. Right? They've got their tongue flopping out. There's evaporation off of their tongue. That's one of the ways that they dissipate heat. We may also send blood to the surface of the skin so that we lose that heat more easily into the air through radiation and convection. Right? We dilate surface blood vessels. That's why my face turns really red after I've been running. Now, we also have behavioral changes, right? I may take off a jacket if I'm hot. I may move inside or turn on the air conditioner, things like that. If I am cold, I may want to make heat through metabolism, thermogenesis, and I can do this by shivering, for instance. That means my muscles are moving, which means they're contracting and requiring ATP, which means I'm turning glucose into ATP, and again, most of that energy is lost as heat. We can also do non-shivering thermogenesis. This is largely through thyroid hormone, which just cranks up our metabolic activity, and again, that metabolism causes heat loss. We can also direct blood to the core of our body, right? We constrict surface blood vessels, and so we don't lose that heat as easily. We make sure we conserve warmth in our core organs, and that's why I look very pale if it's been cold outside. We can also do something called countercurrent exchange of heat. That looks a little bit like this, where before blood vessels go to the surface, we have them pass by warm arteries, and heat gets transferred between the two. This I'm going to talk more with you about in our reproduction chapter. So just stick that in a pocket, and we'll talk about it again later.